There's a way there's ways around that, and it shouldn't be a barrier for you to stop and start engaging this area, because you might not actually be aware that you might have a whole cohort or cohort of people that are actually playing and engaging with your sport, or fans. So I would really encourage everybody to do that. Just briefly, the 5 steps. So the first one is assess. So really understanding where you're at in this journey, understanding kind of what needs to be done. The second one is looking at education. So in order for you to meaningfully engage in this area, you need to be educated on, and you need to understand why you're actually doing these things. So yes, it's great to have a pride round, but why are you having that pride round? What are you hoping to achieve? Is that the best step for you to take, or is it maybe another step? The third one is consult. So this basically is engaging with the LGBTIQ plus community to understand the needs. So that might be engaging with some research. It might be looking at research that's already been done, but primarily it's engaging with the LGBTIQ plus community to understand the needs, the barriers. Okay, so there might be plenty actually in your sport, but you might not be aware of them. You might not have connected with them. So that's a really important step, especially around trans policies and things like that. You can't be devising trans policies if you're not consulting and speaking for trans and gender diverse athletes. The fourth stage is engage. So this is where you kind of engage in LGBT inclusion, and it might be episodically. So it might be multiple times through the year. It might be celebrating specific days, whether it's Pride Month or something like that, wear it purple. So that is basically when you start to engage because you've got the resources, you've been educated on it, and then working towards the fifth and final step is really much about that enactment. So this is where this aspect of diversity inclusion is kind of embedded and institutionalized across the organization. It's not just one person's job, it's everybody's job. One thing that stood out from a recent research project I did with a state sport organization was that it actually impacted all aspects of the organization, whether that's coaches, physios, HR managers around policies, CEOs, whether they're speaking out about issues. It's not just one box that is one person's job. It really does affect all aspects of the organization. So what we want to basically do is take organizations to that enactment stage, so that doing this type of work is at the heart and soul of the organization, and that it's not kind of just a tokenistic or a one-off thing. It's basically, this is our organization, this is our values, this is why we're doing it, and these are the steps that, or these are the ways that we kind of enact that on a day-to-day basis. There'll be an information session and more information around this in terms of what it means, but I will pass over to Christine now just to give you a bit more background in terms of how Proud to Play can help.
Good morning, thank you Ryan, and thank you everyone for joining us on this beautiful Melbourne morning. I would just like to second Lisa's acknowledgement of country and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the many lands on which we meet. That for me is the sorry, I had a moment there. The Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who might be with us today. Thank you to Vicsport and Vic Health for their support in this area. As I was saying previously when we joined the meeting, this has been a culmination of years of conversations, I think, this process. Having worked across diversity and inclusion for 10 years now in Australia, we quite often hear that people want to do the right thing, they just don't necessarily know the best process or the best steps. We quite often hear that we have little bits here and there, but it's not embedded across an organisation. The whole purpose of this piece of work is to be able to support those organisations to embed and enact this at an organisational level. I can stand here and I can tell you the fluffy reasons as to why we should be doing it. We know it's the right thing to do. We know that it impacts people's physical and mental health. We know that it creates social connection. But the reality is, for a lot of LGBTIQ plus community members, that sport is not seen as a safe and inclusive space. So you've got 14% of the population who potentially are not engaging in your sport. So the other side of this is, whether you do it for the fluffy reasons or for the business case, it is a good business case to be engaging in this space, not only from a participation and member base, but also from a staffing perspective as well. We know out of the US, a number of studies in large companies around diversity and inclusion within leadership level shows that those companies have a 30% higher income than that of their competitors. We know that they have a higher retention of staff, happier staff and more productive staff. We have a world now where people have options. People don't tend to stay in jobs for long periods of time unless they feel welcome and safe and included in that environment. So if you want to make yourself the standout organisation that people want to come to, they want to come to a space where they can be their whole self, you know, where they can feel connected and included and that they can talk about themselves. So there are a number of reasons for taking this on, but it is a good business case. It's also a feel-good factor because there are people at the end of this who will be impacted. Everyday people like myself, people like Ryan, people like Lauren, you know, our families and our friends, and even if it's not those of us who identify, we have extended family and friends who make decisions and choices based on their morals and their ethics and their values. So when you're thinking about this work, don't think of it just as we're just targeting LGBTIQ plus people. We're working with them and their extended family and their extended networks. Because we all make decisions on these things. Today's panelists is a great lineup of panelists. Rana is going to do all the introductions, so I'll leave that to Rana to do. But I just want to thank you all for attending again and supporting this work. And I'd also like to just apologise, unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, our NIC representative is unable to attend, but Jody Hawkins stepped in last minute for us. Jodie has a wealth of experience and knowledge as a sports administrator and a former general manager of the Sydney Sixers, so brings some really interesting content with that. So I will pass back and we'll get started, I think.
Perfect. We'll just quickly jump to Lauren as well, just to give a few words, because just so everyone can meet the team who hasn't already done so. So I'll just hand over to Lauren for a second as well.
Thanks, Ryan and Christine. Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren and my pronouns are she, they. I'm really excited to be a new addition to the team here at Proud to Play. I've previously worked in council as a diversity and inclusion representative, and I've played sport for many years, and I am a Change the Game ambassador as well, driving forward gender equity in sport. And thankfully, all of these lovely things are connected, which bring me here today to help launch the Rainbow Roadmap. So I'd also like to acknowledge the land that I'm on today of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and to also pay respects to their relationship to country and any community members we might have joining us today. So primarily my experience at Darebin Council, I think, might be of notable mention for some of the people joining us here today. I worked as an inclusion officer in the recreation department. I was surrounded by a very progressive council. I was surrounded by progressive individuals, but I still had a lot of challenges in actually enacting an inclusive practice. Some of the challenges that people might be able to relate to that I definitely experienced was the research that we've heard around people really wanting to do the right thing. We wanted to include inclusion in our strategic policy, but sometimes actually doing this was difficult. We didn't really know where to start, or I was asked, you're the inclusion officer, let's do it. It's not really a regulated industry. So while we've got lovely representatives like Rick from Maribyrnong Council that hosts an inclusive network, and we've got industry leaders that are doing amazing things around, I would definitely be one of them who joins us today, I found that it wasn't really a space where you could sit down and start at point A and then get to point B. And the pressure from the department, particularly in sport, is that we're addressing all needs of different marginalised groups. And when you look at any position description within an inclusive job, there's usually about 5 user groups that are represented as underrepresented groups that we want to help. So there's a lot of pressure on these inclusion officers, and then what tends to happen is we do these pop-up events because we need to do them quick and dirty and then get on to the next thing. So that's, I think, why we see a lot of these Pride events, a lot of mini education sessions, a lot of we'll do a social media post for a day of significance. And while these really great steps in the right direction towards inclusion, I really do feel a strong sense that if we step back and we focus on less and we do it better, that we'll be able to enact a much better change for our broader community. And most notably as well, any sort of gender equity change is LGBTIQ change. So it's really important to know the more that we challenge rigid stereotypes of, hello, gone sideways. I don't know if anyone else's has gone sideways. That's our aerobics for today, doing our neck exercises. But the more we challenge these rigid gender stereotypes within our sporting community and within our workplace community, the more we're going to be able to enact change within the industry that's going to be beneficial to this user group. So some of the solutions that we can offer, I guess it's really helpful to get to know me as a new addition to the team. We're here to support you. So we know that regular meetings, regular support, just having a person's email that you can turn to and say, hey, Lauren, I need to ask you about this statement we're releasing. Hey, Lauren, I need your help with this policy we're writing. That's exactly what we're here for as tailored experts in this field. So nice to put another person into the ring that you can use as a support. And lastly, this is an evidence-based approach. So I'm really excited to be joining Vicsport along the way to see this project come together. So I think I'll hand it back over to Ryan, and we'll kick things off from there.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Lauren. And just to reiterate that, LGBT work is very similar in addressing the foundations of gender inequality. So yes, LGBT work is specific work, but ultimately to do that, you do need to address gender equality as well. So it's very much all working towards the same area. That's our info from there. So I'm going to hand back to Tom, who's just going to give a bit more background, and then we'll jump into the panel.
Thanks, Ryan. And everyone, I don't know what button I pressed to make the slides turn sideways, but the joys of Zoom. We're back in lockdown, back on Zoom, but all good. Just briefly wanted to share some of the work we've done at Vicsport that fits into the Rainbow Roadmap, because while our work is really about supporting our members and advocating on behalf of the industry, but as the peak body for sport in Victoria, of course, we are our own organisation, and we need to make sure our own governance and policies and practices are as inclusive as they can be. So in terms of doing an assessment, we did submit to the Pride and Sport Index this year for the first time with a score of 21 excuse me, out of 100, which I think was a good start, a good sort of baseline assessment to give us ideas and things that we can implement moving forward. I'll note as well that the Pride and Sport Index isn't the only way you can assess what you're doing, but we found that fairly useful in sort of working through, and yeah, we're looking forward to kind of going through that and sort of working out what else we can do. In terms of education, we've engaged Proud to Play to do training for our staff, and probably will again in the future. We had an Ida Hobbit lunch this year with Stella Lessick from the Queer Sporting Alliance, who shared their excellent insights with us. And yeah, doing that education was just super valuable for our team in getting us all to think about how inclusion fits across all our roles, not just with a couple of us. So moving forward, I think there's plenty of opportunities for Vicsport to strengthen our own approach to inclusion, to really embed it across our own governance and policies and procedures, to look at how we can support LGBTI workforce in sport, how we can work with Proud to Play on the ongoing education of members, particularly leaders and board members in sport, and to continue to advocate on behalf of the industry. So main message here is that we're on the journey with you. Ryan, I'll hand back over to you, and I'll bring up the slide with the QR code to sign up, people sign up to the mailing list, but I'll let you introduce that and then move on to the panel.
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. So modern technology allows us to have a QR code. So for anyone who wants to get more information and to potentially sign up to go on this journey with us, please scan that QR code, and basically that will give you information on the Vicsport website to kind of sign up. We're going to have an information session in July. So basically you can hear more about it and to understand how you can actually kind of action plan and what's available in order for you to go on this. So apart from that, one other thing I will mention is we are developing a range of education suites, and the one that we do have now, which we can put in the chat afterwards and send out, is an LGBT inclusive leadership unit. The first sessions will run at the end of July. It's a half-day workshop, and we can provide more information around that, and that's specifically around the role of leadership in promoting LGBT inclusion and anyone working across management positions, etc. So we can, run that first one, and then we're going to develop ones down the track around allyship. We're going to redo our trans and gender diverse inclusion one. So there will be a range of options over the coming years for you to engage in a range of education. Right, that's enough from us. I apologise, you're going to hear more from me now, because unfortunately our wonderful panel host, Rana, has had a blackout at home and has no electricity or internet. So often ready and willing to jump in in these situations. So I will take this opportunity to thank everyone so far, and I am going to introduce our wonderful panelists. So first up, we have Craig Tiley. So Craig is the Chief Executive Officer at Tennis Australia. Throughout his time at the organisation, he's been a vocal supporter of LGBTIQ+ communities participating in tennis. His encouragement and organisation's actions in the space saw Tennis Australia earn the award for highest ranking organisation in Australia at the 2019 Pride in Sport Awards, and ongoing support for the LGBTI+ tennis tournament, the Glam Slam, which holds its final inside Melbourne Park during the Australian Open. So welcome, Craig. Kate Palmer, we have next. So Kate is one of Australia's most experienced and highly regarded sports executive, having formerly held the positions of CEO at Sport Australia and Netball Australia. Kate became the first woman to head Sport Australia, and during her 3-year tenure led the rebranding of the organisation, governance reform among national sports organisations, and put in place safeguards to protect children in sporting environments. Over 10 years at Netball Australia, Kate maintained the game's status as the highest participation sport for women and oversaw the introduction of its National League Super Netball. Welcome, Kate. And finally, Jody Hawkins. So Jody is a senior sports executive and former general manager for the Sydney Sixers, most recently helping secure 2 back-to-back BBL titles. She's worked across a range of sports, including cricket and NRL, and is one of only 3 women to have held the role of general manager of a Big Bash League club. Whilst at the Sixers, she championed and led a range of diversity inclusion initiatives and helped develop an extensive LGBTIQ+ inclusion portfolio, including establishing the first Rainbow Supporter Group in Australian cricket and deliver Pride rounds from both BBL and WBBL. Jodie believes in using the power of sport to advance social change, and her leadership is proof that professional sporting teams can have success both on and off the field. Welcome, Jodie. So we're going to jump straight into it, and just a caveat as well. So I've had the pleasure of working with all 3 of these individuals across a range of projects, and it just makes my life and everybody's life so much easier when leadership really come to the table and just work alongside you, and it's so refreshing. So I just want to say a thank you to that, and welcome again, everybody.
Thank you, Ryan.
Perfect. So we're going to start with Craig. So morning, Craig. You have had to engage in various issues around LGBT inclusion, from players, stadium names, hosting an LGBT inclusive event at the Australian Open. Why is it, and why has it been important for you to show strong leadership in this particular area of diversity?
Well, first of all, morning, everyone. And it's great to have an opportunity to spend Thursday morning with you. And also congratulations to Ryan and the team at Vicsport. receiving, it's really exciting receiving the Rainbow Roadmap and actually seeing some tangible outcomes of the great work that's been done. We had a conversation before getting on this webinar around the leadership that Victoria particularly takes, not just in Australia, but certainly globally. So congrats, and we're excited to continue to go on the journey with this great work. But in answer to your question, I know we only have a short amount of time, and give many reasons, but to really kind of bring it down into three reasons as to why, to your question, I would say three would be: number one would be opportunity to impact, number two would be a safe and inclusive workspace, or place of participation, place to compete, and the third would be being a key business initiative and a key business strategy. And us as a sport, I can't talk to other sports. I can just talk to what we do in tennis, and we're fortunate in that we've had a history of leadership. Not always the case, but there's always been one or two people that have been drivers, and that is going to be, I know we'll come on to that later on how we do it, but there's many challenges that you're always going to face with sometimes what will feel like you're swimming upstream against the tide of the majority, but it's not until you actually stick your head up and be willing to be counted and be willing to hold yourself to account as well as to your team to account on ensuring you have an environment that is safe and inclusive, an environment that impacts all. In our sport, for example, is that we know that there's many people that play the game, there's many people that want to play the game, and unless they completely understand that the opportunity that everyone has is the same, is we're going to disenfranchise a very large segment of our community, and that's not good business sense. It's also not good human sense. And therefore, and I know we'll talk later about some of the initiatives that we do, but it does take, it takes leadership at the end of the day, but I think it also takes clarity of leadership on creating a narrative on why it's important. And for us, why it's important, it's an opportunity to impact the entire community. It's an opportunity to have a safe and inclusive place, and it's also it's an opportunity for really good business practice. And that it delivers commercial outcomes. As you said at the beginning, there's enough research to indicate there's a large segment of the population that if they don't feel safe, and they don't feel included, they're just simply not going to participate. And why would you as a sport, or why would your business have any sense in your or any environment where you don't allow that to happen? So my last comment was, we have had challenges, as you mentioned, naming of stadiums and homophobic comments and old-fashioned and traditional attitudes. And I'm fortunate in my leadership role since 2014 is I take a very bash the door down approach to that, and simply because it's much easier to bring a village of people along on the journey with you when you overt and you stand up and you make it count, and you very quickly respond to anything that doesn't create an environment that you're trying to develop.
Perfect. Thank you, Craig. Kate, you have had experiences engaging with this area, particularly the development and the rollout of the trans and gender diverse community guidelines from Sport Australia. What did you learn from that experience, and do you have any takeaway messages that might help others who may need to take leadership specifically around trans and gender diverse inclusion?
Thanks, Ryan. And just to reiterate Craig's comments, to congratulate Vicsport and you, Ryan, on the work that, and Pride to Play on the work that you have done. It's terrific that so much progress is being made in this area. And Craig, I have a Ruth Bader Ginsburg quote for you, which says, "Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you." And I would say that really does demonstrate your leadership style. Even though you say it's crashing through barriers, you do it in a way that makes people want to come with you. And I think that's a really strong sign of a good leader. But Ryan, from my perspective, what we learned from our experiences at Sport Australia was that sports genuinely do want to come with you. They do want to understand how to make their environments more inclusive and welcoming. One of the really challenging pieces is that if it's not the board or CEO who are the champions, there's usually someone in the organisation who is, and usually they have a title like inclusion manager. And we need to encourage them to bring their CEO and board on early, so that the education piece happens at the start, not the end. And I thought you asked me a really interesting question when we were talking earlier this week. You said, do boards bring people in when they're making decisions about policy, experts, to help them understand? And I think good boards do that. They should. It's a really strong governance principle. But I think they need to get them in at the start. And I must admit, for us, if I learned something from my experience, was how did we get the minister on board early? Did we get the board on board early? And it was about education, because they want to know. So for me, that was a really important lesson. And we know that sports move at glacial pace. The change is really, really hard. And so that's a stronger reason to have the boards, committees, ministers, everyone else aligned, so that we come on board really quickly with the work. I have to say, it was probably one of the most uplifting experiences for me. And that's the thing, I probably didn't understand the impact of the work locally. And that's important. I think as administrators, we often lose sight of the fact that we're accountable and responsible for many participants at the grassroots level, and the impact can be almost immediate. And Merrily Barnes, who did most of the work on this, I have to say, she was amazing. We received so much communication from participants at grassroots level saying, thank you, you've made a difference to my life. And I think we forget that as administrators. We're too far away. You need to reach down into the community and see it face to face. So lots of learnings, a great initiative. But I take your point, though. We can have lots and lots of policies, we can have guidelines, but unless we actually really take action and continue that journey, and this is why this roadmap is so impressive, because it actually helps us lead, go along a path to actually true inclusion. So a great experience for me overall.
Mute myself there. Welcome, Jodie. So you started with pretty much a blank canvas with the Sixers and your LGBTIQ plus portfolio. Can you talk us through how you developed the LGBT work over the years, and any tips for other organisations who are starting from scratch?
Yeah, I think for us, being a big commercial sport, we needed to be really clear on why we were going to be working with the community. And I remember our first meeting, Ryan, with Julie Stafford, one of our advocates within community cricket. And our responsibility and my responsibility didn't just lie with the elite teams. It also, we have a responsibility around participation and driving participation. So the key for us was a consultation with staff and playing groups. Everyone's very familiar with the Israel Folau situation. I was really keen to make sure we didn't come across that. And I'm very lucky that both our men's and women's teams are really passionate about inclusion. So for me, it needed to start with engagement and ensuring that as a business unit within Cricket New South Wales, that everyone was on board, that this was a direction that we wanted to go down. And then the big thing was, I don't have any staff, or I didn't have any staff who were from the community. So making sure we were working with yourself, Ryan, and other community members to have a real impact. I often talk about, I don't want to slap a rainbow flag on something, pat myself on the back and say, job done. For me, it's about creating an actual change in society, an actual change in our programs. So making sure we had those sort of foundational pieces ready. Everyone was prepared to do the work. We had the right consultation in place, so we were talking to the right people. And then education. I'm a big one on we should be educating people around involvement. And that's not just LGBT inclusion, that's inclusion across sort of any area. It's funny, Kate was talking about boards. We recently had some feedback around Cricket Australia's position on not calling Australia Day. And I did ask our CEO, were our board planning before they make any decisions around the position to get that external education? And it's something that we've done I think, pretty well, like within the Sydney Sixers. So our community cricket team, they're educated, our playing groups and staff are educated, but we probably haven't broadened that out to the wider business, or definitely to the board. But yeah, for me, it was mainly around getting everyone on board and making sure that we had the right people guiding us down this path, rather than just trying to assume things on our own when we didn't have anyone representing that community within our organisation.
Perfect. So the next couple of questions are just kind of freestyle, but perfect segue there, Jody. Next one is about commitment and resistance. So what are some of the things that leaders can do to increase support and bring people on the journey towards this? So we know social media can be good and it can be terrible, but stop ramming this down our throat, stop pushing your agenda. These are all some of the things that we hear. So anybody got any insights into kind of how you actually kind of increase that commitment across your organization, especially when people might not think we should be doing this? That's to anyone.
Great.
Who wants to go? I mean, I can get started on that. And I do see there's a question, I think, that Catherine's asked about, how to progress inclusion and diversity in the community clubs when volunteers already feel like they're overburdened with a whole series of activities. And maybe in some of three of our answers, we can try and address that question, because that is a common challenge that we find at grassroots and where particularly community clubs feel like this is an extra thing to do. And we don't, we have programs in place which don't make it an extra thing, that make it part of the success of the club. But we can talk to that. But I think it's an interesting, when Jody made the comment, one of the things, and again, I can just talk to what we did that really worked, is that first, making sure that the whole diversity and inclusion strategy is your top strategic pillar. And when you're setting your strategic direction for the next 5 years, that becomes part of your strategic pillar. It has an executive lead, has a seat on the board, and it has leadership, just like you're talking about having an successful Australian Open, or getting more players to compete on the world stage globally. It all has to be done. All is done in a way where we're including all. And so I think in any organization, whether it be the local community club or whether it be a national governing body, the leadership of the whole diversity initiatives and inclusive initiatives needs to be at the top, and needs to find a way to get at the top. Kate spoke about advocacy in the organization, and often it gets lost because if the person advocating doesn't have a strong enough voice, or hasn't a voice in the decision making, it becomes extremely difficult and frustrating. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing, which we did in partnership with the community, was obviously the launch of the Glam Slam. So we actually had an overt event which celebrated the success of participating in the community, and we're able to launch it globally and make it part of our mainstream activity. And it has it's a great thing that we can point to in a very overt way of what the sport can do. So having an asset in some form that is genuine in its delivery and successful financially as well is critical to it. So I think it's everyone has a different way of going on a journey, but our general approach is to build the village. And I do like the actions that you've laid out in the roadmap, because there's some common themes there that some organizations are already doing, particularly around educate. And I think that to have some consistency across sports on how to, and then to start building some evidence on what are the challenges and getting it through, even further evidence. I know, Ryan, you have you'll have a library of evidence already, and getting that out there to people to understand the impact that it has.
And look, I'd just add to that, working with great partners. So if you're in a community organisation, and Vicsport is a great example of that, their reach is into community. You need experts who can guide your work, because people lose confidence. If they don't understand, they feel really uncomfortable, and they don't know how to tackle things. So the experts can help guide the work. Having a simple tool like the roadmap is great. They can challenge you though when you move off track. I think that's really important. But they also let you ask questions so you understand, and it gives you confidence. And look, one of the really, you know, we've got some amazing clubs in Victoria who are doing great work, and it's as simple as putting information on your website that you're open for business, and that you welcome gender diverse, transgender and gender diverse people to your community and to your sporting club. And I think there's some really basic things, and being really, really practical. You know, you can have policies, but you actually need to have an understanding in your club. And I had a wonderful story. A transgender, a colleague of mine, went along to a community sport club and to ask whether she could join up, and ended up spending about 2 or 3 hours talking with the community, because they all wanted her to be part of this community. And she went away feeling, well, she was surprised initially, but then, as you can imagine, embraced this interest. And in 3 hours, she really changed the way this community understood that there are people who are different than they are, but it doesn't mean they can't be part of their club. But, you know, there's codes of conduct, there's gender neutral competitions, there's things you can do about uniforms. There's lots of very practical things at a grassroots club. And it's a matter of actually ensuring your committee is on the same page, that your members understand the type of community you want to create, and that everyone's welcome. So very, very practical steps that most community clubs can take. But Vicsport, you know, is a great leader in this space in Victoria and in Australia, as we acknowledged earlier, can help.
I guess from our perspective, I'll touch on 2 things. One's the community club sort of side, and our our community cricket team were very adamant that we can't be creating different participation products for different groups. It becomes too hard for them to actually roll them out successfully in community. And again, it's about doing a few things really well. So we worked on ways to bring the community into the existing programs, as opposed to creating new programs to work with the community. So that was really important to us. How do we create clubs, and how do we educate clubs to be inclusive, and then publicly inclusive, so people knew where to go to get involved. The other thing is, as you can imagine, when we do our Pride rounds, our social media blows up a little bit, and we've found the best. We've tried previously not to rant and rave at people. We don't yell back when people yell at us. We're all about using fact to respond to people, to the point where if they email us, I would email in return and just sort of say, well, here are the facts of the situation. You know, 80-something% of people are exposed to homophobic language in sport. Do you think that's appropriate? And pose the question back. And often they're like, no, but if you're going to do a Pride round, you should do a heterosexual round as well. And I'm like, okay, well, that conversation's just gone off the rails. And sometimes you need to, like, I've just walked away from the conversation, but I always respond at least once, because I feel it's important to give some more context, and to keep giving the context as to why the club was taking that stance, why the club was working with the community. And often after that, and after you put fact forward, it tends to drain a little bit of the emotion out of it, at least for the rational people who want to have that conversation. There's always going to be the irrational people who want to just rant and rave. But by using fact in your response, it just pulls a little bit of that emotion out of it and forces them to, the person on the other end of the conversation, to really open up a little bit and try and understand it from a different perspective. But we're also respectful of the fact that some people may never ever change their mind on this kind of work. And part of inclusion is we need to kind of understand and accept that to a point as well. But you, more often than not, when you base your response on some sort of fact, you can take that out of it, you take the emotion out of it, and you open up a better conversation about why and how important the work is.
Ryan, there's a question that's just come across the chat around, Eric has been on a Zoom call with Canada this morning and asked questions about integrity more broadly. And probably just to give you a sense, I think Australia is doing really good work in this space, and the putting Sport Integrity Australia together in place with a really broad remit. And I have to say, the remit, I think, is expanding beyond where they thought it was going to be initially, because they've realised that sport, there are some huge issues in sport related to discrimination, harassment, bullying, child protection, all of those sorts of areas. And I think, you know, the Human Rights Commission is also doing great work, and Kate Jenkins did the work on the a transgender and gender diverse policy for the Sports Commission. But Sport Integrity Australia has just released a national integrity framework for sport in this country. And what the documents that go along with that are things like constitutional change that embeds principles, so that at least we've got the framework in place, that we have the legal elements, and then all of these pieces, and this is why the work Vicsport in a way is sort of ahead of the game, because it's actually putting practical things in place for people to use that support all of that broader legislation and policy that's being done at the government or federal level. So I hope that answers your question, Eric. I think Australia is on track, and I suspect Canada has looked at the model that Australia's put in place in terms of Sport Integrity Australia. It's not perfect, but it's a great start, and it's helping sports with the support of the National Sport Tribunal, which can deal with issues, grievances and member protection issues.
So Ryan, can I just jump in and add a comment, and I'll take less time on my next answer. But I think if you think if you're a volunteer at a local sporting club, and you get this this avalanche of information on policies and regulations, and if we put ourselves in the shoes of those people that are on the ground every single day, committing their time to doing something that they love, and then they get all this information that just becomes too much. I think it's on us as leaders to find the most effective ways to impact the local environment, and we've really struggled with that. We have a little under 3,000 tennis sporting clubs, or sporting clubs, tennis clubs. Anyway, recently we adopted what we call the sustainability rating for each club, and we assigned a workforce to go out into the environment, and this takes time and effort, and to partner with the clubs in bringing them along on the journey on what's important for their sustainability as a club. And at the core of that is them having diverse and inclusive practices. But it's also what we have to do is sit down with those volunteers, in many cases sometimes do the work for them, but give them some real practical actions that don't add any additional burden to the work. So I think it is spreading the load. It does take a workforce to do that, but we've found so far that's been the most effective way to make that impact, because previously it was, okay, we've sent the document out the door, now we've done our job. And a top-down approach just does not work. And so I think, I mean, that's why this work is pretty exciting, because it's going to create an opportunity for someone to actually go to these communities and go to these clubs and actually have something tangible that they can bring a club on a journey on. But it does take an effort.
Just on that then, for Jodie, you briefly touched upon it, but unfortunately resistance is common within this area, and we just need to look at the examples going on in the US at the minute with the introduction of anti-trans bills in particular. So from your experiences, are there any particular strategies or things that you might want to share around when resistance does or pushback does happen, or when you're trying to take it to a board to get accepted and things like that, and you kind of get that pushback? Have you got any tips? And I think this is really relevant for those volunteers who might be wanting to do the right thing, but then might be hearing different voices from within the club that might set them back, for example.
I'm happy to jump in. I would say you need to understand what the pushback is around, like what is the context of that pushback. So a very smart people and culture leader once said to me that you've got 2 ears and 1 mouth and you should use them in that ratio. So I think part of it is listening first and understanding what the hesitancy is around it, so that you can equip yourself with the right information to go back and kind of advocate for the work. Again, I'm a big believer that yelling and screaming back at people won't get you the result that you're looking for. I think, you know, taking a much more measured approach, trying to understand what that hesitancy is, and then work through it, whether it be education or, you know, just further conversations to try and advocate for that work. That's, for me, the approach that's worked quite well, albeit you know, there are still certain areas of the business that that may not come on board, or certain individuals. But the one thing we have absolutely learned of late is that even if you do have pushback in your business, at the very least, you need your people and culture team to be working with you on it, because you need to make sure you've got policies and procedures in place that at least are inclusive and allow for the work to continue, even as you work through some of those other, you know, some of the other resistance across the business that you might receive. So cricket traditionally is a sport that's run by and because boards are appointed, that, you know, the governance structure of cricket is that the delegates that sit at the premier cricket level, and they're more traditionalist cricket people, they appoint the boards of the state, and then the state appoints the boards of the national body. So the governance structure really does mean that you need to spend more time educating and working with some of those areas of resistance to get done what you need to get done. Otherwise, it will come to a point, and we have experienced it, where things like marriage equality come around and the club has it. The Sixers as a club have a very strong position, but we actually sit under Cricket New South Wales, and our board needed a bit more time and a bit more education in order to get to a similar position that we did as a club, because you can't have those two forces pulling against each other. So yeah, really understanding what that hesitancy is, and then building your education and conversation around that to help alleviate whatever concerns they might have. Also being able to put forward a really good business case for it, so that it's not just about being the right thing to do, it's about being good business.
And then one final question to finish on my questions. Are there any particular anecdotes or stories of a positive scenario or positive story that you've experienced or had or witnessed around engaging in this area? So I know, Kate, you previously talked about having that kind of interaction around the impact on the ground with the trans person, but does anybody have any positive stories that they'd like to share around actually engaging in this area?
Who wants to go? I'm happy to share. I mean, I think that's a really good question, because if you can have practical stories, and they can be really, and there's a good narrative. I don't claim to be very intelligent, but I do like stories. So if anyone can really bring a story, a good story, it's something that you can lead with. And so I think for us, probably the things that and the emotional piece I've seen is when we have events that are celebrating the success of our diverse communities, and then we bring the entire organization in to observe that celebration of success. It's amazing seeing people say, "Oh, I didn't know that happened," or "I didn't know," and just seeing the complete transformation in attitude is like it's you know, I've seen that happen a number of times. You know, an example was 2 years ago, before we had to deal with this virus, was at our Glam Slam event, when we employed about 12,000 people, and we were communicating to that group along about our Glam Slam championships, which was going to be held during the finals of the Australian Open and be globally televised to 1 billion people around the world that are watching, and for that to get some profile, and it was fantastic to see that our staff that never knew that was going on to then participate, and then the following year all wanted to come back and wanted to volunteer their time for it. So I think that was something to scale, which was been pretty special, which I remember. It was a reminder to me, it's a village again. It's bringing people along on the journey. And just to quickly talk on the resistance thing, is that my approach to resistance has been to welcome it, because it then provides a shock to the person that's providing the resistance, and then to try and change it. And changing it, I just accept the fact that sometimes it's going to be a little harder with some than it is with others.
we've definitely seen an increase in participation by working with the community. So the Cricket New South Wales are doing the numbers at the moment, but it looks to be, a pretty decent uptake, especially in the inner west where we have been working with rainbow families. So that's been a really positive outcome. We get great feedback on our Pride rounds to go with the negative feedback. So for every pushback we usually get one or two other tweets or emails in to tell us how nice it is to see the club being more inclusive and taking on that sort of thing. So, but yeah, as a tangible outcome, we have definitely seen an increase in participation in some key markets with the numbers being crunched at the moment.
And I'd just add, Ryan, that in the bigger picture, how far sport has come, and congratulations to cricket as well as tennis, the work they've done, and from a leadership perspective. For me, it was when Kevin Roberts actually wrote a story for the media about after cricket had made their announcements around ensuring that transgender and gender diverse people could play cricket at the highest level in Australia. And he wrote a story, and that very public demonstration of leadership and support, it's actually all part of so it has to happen at the community level, but having one of our highest administrators in the country standing up and speaking out is really key.
Yeah, thank you. And I think it is really important for LGBTI people to hear that support. Like, I remember, if we think about like the type of messages that Donald Trump was sending towards LGBT people, banning trans people from the military and stuff, and then suddenly you have Joe Biden tweeting saying in Pride Month about acceptance and support for LGBT people. Now, I can't tell you how, as a member of the community, how that makes you feel seeing senior leaders actually support it, because I think the resistance part, and when things become politicized, it can be quite challenging for our community, because it's kind of saying, well, your life and your identity is politicized and we don't want to engage with it. So it can be quite tough on people within our community. But that concludes our panel. Thank you so much to our wonderful panelists for giving up your Thursday morning and sharing your insights. It really is very much appreciated. So thank you once again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes our session this morning. So just to recap, you should have had the QR code, but you can still find that on the Vicsport website around signing up for the Rainbow Roadmap, and also our education session around inclusive leadership, which will be in July. The information will be on our website, and we'll also tweet about it as well. But please get in touch if you would like to get onto it. But otherwise, thank you very much, and thank you for everyone for your questions, and thank you for everyone who is working across the sports sector to make it more inclusive and safe for LGBT communities. Enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe.
Thank you all. Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.